There's a lot of refereeing of opinions to be done among even those on the right when it comes to Trump and this most recent saga involving his son, Donald Trump Jr., that we've been discussing. To help us do that, we're pleased to be joined by Charles Cooke, who is the editor of National Review Online, nationalreview.com, also the author of the book, The Conservatarian Manifesto, and sat down with me yesterday for an Against the Current long-form interview where we covered a range of topics we won't have time for today, but you'll be able to check out later today at upstream-ideas.com. Charles, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So why don't we start with some of the opinions of some of your colleagues at National Review. We have Jonah Goldberg basically saying, look, we should just take kind of a wait-and-see approach, to borrow from Charles Krauthammer, when the Trump administration, despite there being no there up until this point at least, acting like there's a there everywhere, maybe that should be some pause for concern. And David French taking it one step further and concluding, based on the release of the Trump Jr. email chain yesterday, that there is now evidence that senior Trump officials attempted to collude with Russia. So how do you referee those opinions over at National Review, and why don't you add your own?
Well, I think they're both right. My opinion on this whole saga has been similar to Jonah's. I wrote a while back that I think one of the reasons that some people are hysterical on this question and other people are not is that some have prejudged this issue and others haven't. If you believe, for example, that there is no doubt that there was criminal activity, that there was Russian collusion, then you are clearly going to just think we're in some slow, elegiac march toward an indictment or an impeachment. If you, as I do, think there might be very little there, then you will take a wait-and-see approach. And I was pleased to see that Jonah agreed with me on that. But part of taking a wait-and-see approach is waiting and seeing, and it's acknowledging what you've seen. And yesterday, the argument that there is something here did gain legs. Now, I think it's very important to separate out the criminal argument. There doesn't seem to have been any wrongdoing here from the moral argument. It is the case that Donald Trump Jr. thought that he was colluding with at least someone related to the Russian government in order to get information on Hillary. In fact, he didn't manage to do so, is somewhat beside the point.
Well, and it just picking up on that point, do you think the best thing that the Trump administration has going for him right now, given what you said, that this is more serious now because of what's been disclosed and what it says about the mindset of Trump Jr., regardless of the rationale behind it, that the best thing the Trump administration has going for him is not their own narrative, but the overreach from Schiff and Schumer and Kaine, blurring the lines between politics and morality and criminality, and invoking the notion that Trump Jr. Has raised the specter of treason.
Yes. Donald Trump is lucky in his enemies. He does seem to have a talent for inspiring the most unhinged reactions from those who dislike him. We've heard this treason word nonstop now. Indeed, we heard it before the election. The definition of treason is extraordinarily narrow in legal terms. Very, very few people in American history have been guilty of treason. That said, I think that one could focus too much on that narrow legal point as a means of obfuscating the big news here, which is that there was an attempt to collude. Now, collusion is not a legal term. It's a descriptive term. And clearly, Donald Trump Jr. is guilty of trying to do so, that he's incompetent and couldn't manage to go through with it. So it doesn't really matter.
So you have used the word collude. We've been sort of back and forth as to whether or not holding a meeting, which happens in campaigns all the time when you're trying to gather opposition research, that holding a meeting, but there was no furtherance of the act. They didn't do anything after that. They simply held a meeting. And you're right that the incompetence factor, I think, is on full display here. They didn't vet this person who they were sitting down with. But is the media coverage just overkill in terms of what we know so far and what actually occurred. Is it incompetence? Is it collusion? Is it criminal treason? I mean, there's a whole bandwidth of accusations, and it just seems the media coverage is just so over the top on this particular issue once again. But what do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think it is. I think it's a big problem with this president. It's a lack of precision. I think a deliberate lack of precision. There is a desire to bring him down, a barely disguised desire to bring him down, and it's there irrespective of what he does or doesn't do. The word collusion, I think, is a fair one because it's a neutral term. The argument here is that Donald Trump Jr. tried to collude, I mean, attempted collusion is the best way of putting it, with those who were associated with the Russian government. As I say, that's not necessarily illegal. And indeed, even if this story were much worse, it wouldn't necessarily be illegal. Suppose that you had evidence that Donald Trump Jr. was given the entire results of the hacking of the Democratic Party servers. That wouldn't be illegal either. I mean, the New York Times was quite happy to publish the products of WikiLeaks hacking. That would be immoral, I think, but legal collusion. And then you get to the point at which it could be illegal collusion if, for example, he'd been involved in the hacking. I mean, I think that's extremely far-fetched. But there is a line beyond which this would be something other than just a political problem. But as you say, it's difficult to break this down because the press is now conditioned to immediately go for the jugular and to push everything up to 11. And so those who want to get to the bottom of it have their work cut out.
And to crowd everything else out. And part of the underreported story from conservatives is the opportunity cost that Trump is imposing. So other stories out this week, the funeral for Officer Familia, the female police officer in New York who was assassinated, where police officers turned their back on de Blasio yet again.
Yeah.
And that could have been something Trump talked about. Maybe he could have even attended the funeral if he, I don't know his schedule, of course, but if he wasn't beset by this. Another story out on another policy topic, a Mexican illegal immigrant who's been removed from the U.S. 7 times killed a father of 3 in a drunk driving crash when he shouldn't have been in this country. That speaks to another important policy discussion that this president has been leading. But all of that gets crowded out because we're opining, as is the D.C. press corps, of course, on Donald Trump Jr. and every word that he uttered with Sean Hannity.
Well, that's right. And I think it's not just bad news for Trump or for the Republican agenda. That's bad news for America. I was astonished a few days ago to log onto the BBC website, the English version. I checked the football scores still. And the main headline was, America emerges from a distressing week. And the story was about the cops who had been shot. And I thought, I follow the news very carefully, but I haven't seen anything like the coverage of this within the United States that it's got in London. Aside from what everyone thinks of Donald Trump, the fact that story has been pretty much ignored, or at least has not been the main topic of discussion, is a bit of a problem because this is not normal. It's not 1968 in America, but the number of police officers who have been attacked in the last 2 years is undoubtedly part of a broader trend. And I'm tempted in this instance to blame the press for some of this, purely in the sense that whatever the president does or whatever the Republican Party does, there is a desire to always bring it back to Russia. That's not to let Donald Trump Jr. off the hook. This is a real story, but even when there isn't a real story, the aim is always to bring it back to Russia. And that's actually crowding out conversations we need to have as a country.
He is Charles Cooke, editor of National Review Online, author of the book, The Conservatarian Manifesto. Charles, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
And he joined us on the turnkey.pro answer line.